I am called an intercultural consultant, an intercultural trainer, cross-cultural trainer. I lived in and worked in 12 countries. I've worked with a lot of Fortune 1000 companies. I do different things. Intercultural trainers, consultants, often work with people who are going on international assignments, helping them to understand the cultural differences, the business culture where they're going. We also do training for people who are returning from international assignments. The cultural adjustment, what we call re-entry shock, is often greater returning from an international assignment than it is outbound. I do a great deal of group business seminars, customized group programs for different organizations and businesses. And more recently, I've been doing what are called inclusive leadership workshops and also executive coaching. Let's see, these are some of the companies that I've worked with. Just added Rockwell Collins in the last few months. Cirque du Soleil was probably one of the most interesting trainings that I've been involved in, training them for China, Korea, and Dubai. For Dubai, I suggested they put some clothes on. And working with Disney to help them understand how to make movies that might be successful in the Indian market as they team up with Bollywood studios. Each one of these, I could tell you many stories. Here we have a little cartoon that shows somebody saying, "What do I do now?" And he's reaching his hand out, and the other person is bowing a little bit and giving his business card. "When is he going to take my card?" And this person's leaning forward. He seems a bit unfriendly. Whoa, personal space invasion. I'm next, what should I do? Should I do namaste type greeting or shake hands? So this cartoon shows a lot of the kinds of things that people think about when they think about what an intercultural trainer consultant does. And I'll show you another little montage here of, there's Japanese style bowing, the ritual for how you give a business card as it's done in Japan. Here's a picture of me in South India with a family where I'm joining them in eating the traditional way with our hands, a little bit uncomfortable sometimes for us as Westerners, but I was doing it the way they do. A little girl doing the traditional greeting in India to her teacher. And we have men holding hands in India, which doesn't mean what it is usually thought to mean here. It just means they're friends. And here you have Richard Gere doing some little faux pas, kissing a famous Bollywood actress in public, and he was burned in effigy for it. And then you have a crowd of people getting onto a commuter train in Mumbai, and crowd management, ways of managing crowds and whether or not you stand in line, those things vary from culture to culture. Eating with chopsticks or how we dress. These are all these things that I have in this montage are visible cultural differences. And there's a lot more to culture than this. What interculturalists deal with is actually something a little bit deeper than that. We cover those things too, but we're more interested in dealing with the underlying logic of cultures. And here I have a statement from an anthropologist, Edward T. Hall. The single greatest barrier to business success is the one erected by culture. And just a few points here. Why would that be the case? Well, here we go. The cultural conditioning we receive as we grow up gives us an underlying hidden cultural lens that we're looking through. Most of us are not aware or only marginally aware that this lens is even there. And yet it affects everything about the way we behave. When we're doing business with other cultures, most of us are unconscious of the lens we're looking through, and chances are we're unconscious of the lens that the other person is looking through as well. So the effect of that is culture is a much greater factor in the success or failure of all of our business interactions and assignments than most of us are aware of. So that's the crux of the matter. Often we use a metaphor of an iceberg. What do we know about icebergs? Pardon? Most of it's unseen. They say maybe 10% is above the water and 90% is below. So that's a good metaphor for cultures, where we have what we call the visible aspects of culture. You go to Japan and you see things that are visibly different than what you see here. That is, if you stay for a longer period of time, you get to know some of the more non-observable or invisible aspects of the culture. So here we have above the water behavior, customs, the sports, business practices, body language, food, how people dress, the speech, the language, festivals, music and arts, and so forth. Those are the visible aspects of culture. Under the surface, we have the beliefs, values, norms, expectations, assumptions, perceptions, and so forth. And there's a cause and effect relationship from all of this, the part of the iceberg that's under the water, to how we behave within a culture. Most of that part under the water remains unconscious to most people, but it includes things like notions of modesty, which vary from culture to culture, conversational patterns, concepts of cleanliness. Just, we could make a list of really thousands of things that vary from culture to culture. Most of us are not thinking about that. If we made a sort of US cultural iceberg, it would have a lot of these things under the water, our values of freedom, individualism, equality, and so forth. I have a picture here of, how many of you had this book read to you as a child, The Little Engine That Could? If you grew up in the US, chances are it was read to you. It's been read to children in the US for 110 years. And what's the moral of the story? What does the train say as it's going up the mountain? Do you remember? I think I can, I think I can. And it comes down the other side and it says, I knew I could, I knew I could. Yeah, yeah. And there we have a cowboy, another sort of iconic image of US culture. And if you take the cultural iceberg of one culture and you take the cultural iceberg of another culture, sometimes they run into each other. And it seems like where they're clashing is on the behavioral level, but where it's really bumping up into another iceberg is under the water. So I have here 4 dimensions of culture that we talk about. Task-oriented culture versus relationship-oriented culture is a good one. And here we have, bouncing onto the screen, a very task-oriented person. And over here we have a very much more relationship-oriented person. So there can be misunderstandings between us here in the US when we're doing business with other cultures. We tend to be very task-oriented. Many other cultures are more relationship-oriented. What does that mean? We begin with the business. Maybe we get to the relationship, or maybe not. Many other cultures begin with the relationship. Maybe they get to the business, or maybe not. It's a reversal of priorities. Different way of looking at things. We have fixed time. Most of us in the US tend to be a little bit more fixed time. Many cultures are more fluid time. I happen to be more of a fluid time person, so I really have to work on that to be on time for things. We have direct, there's that guy again. We have the direct communication style preference in the US. Many other cultures have a more indirect style, and so forth and so on. Each of us is also shaped by many co-cultures. We begin with the national culture, but there's much more to the story. We all belong to many different groups, what we call co-cultures. So we have the gender we belong to, the region of the country we came from. That makes a difference, right? The generation we belong to, the religion that we grew up with, the family culture, education, the ethnicity, the social class, the neighborhood, the friends we belong to, economic status, corporate culture, profession, the functional culture within a corporate culture. Are we human resources? Are we accountants? Or whatever? Those have cultures to them. Sexual orientation, the host culture for visiting from another country. All of these things go into this funnel here and create a unique individual cultural profile. So that's part of the story too. It's not just about national cultural differences. So here you can see a ranking: US, UK, France, Germany, Russia, Spain, India, Japan, Middle East, Mexico, Africa, China, and Southeast Asia. This is a dimension of culture where we, in the cultures to the left, tend to be more individualistic. The cultures on the right tend to be more group-oriented. The individualistic cultures, we get our identity from our achievements. The group-oriented cultures tend to get their identity more from the groups that they belong to. And it's not like if I come from the US, I'm necessarily going to be exactly like my overall country profile. Any one of us, here we have a bell curve for US culture. Any one individual might be anywhere in that bell curve. Overall, though, that bell curve is more to the left of, say, the Indian bell curve or the Japanese bell curve, which is much more group-oriented culture. So here we have another one, direct versus indirect communication style, going through these pretty quickly. Another one is power distance. How hierarchical is your culture, is your organization that you're part of? Is there kind of a top-down chain of command and people just know that that's the way things work? Or is it more flat and everybody's kind of equal? And so might be CEO today, but I might be CEO in a few years. And it's just a role that the person is in. So cultures vary in this dimension as well. There are many of these dimensions. Uncertainty avoidance is another one. Cultures vary in terms of how comfortable are they with change, with innovation, with ambiguity, uncertainty, unpredictability. The US, we're pretty comfortable with a lot of things. With what's new is not necessarily frightening for us. We're a creative country, we're comfortable with innovation and things being uncertain. But many other cultures are far over here. If you go to work with people in Germany, for example, on a team, if you have some people from Germany and you have some people from the US, the people from Germany might be much more concerned about having a really perfect plan before you jump into action. Whereas the people from the US might be saying, let's just do it, you know, like the Nike ad. And if it doesn't work, we'll fix it. That's okay. But the Germans will say, no, we must follow the plan very carefully. Any one individual German person might be different from that, but overall, that's the norm for German culture. An interesting thing happens when you take those two dimensions and you plot them against each other. This is advanced material here. I'm not going to test you on this. But look at this. Here you have power distance along the bottom. Here's 90 countries ranked from low power distance, meaning more egalitarian, more flat organizations, preference for that. On the right, you have hierarchical cultures. And then we add on the left another dimension of this uncertainty avoidance one I was just showing you. Here you have weak and strong uncertainty avoidance cultures. These cultures up here tend to be fine if things are ambiguous, uncertain, unpredictable. We're okay with that. You see Jamaica up there, that kind of fits. As you go down here, you see more and more. Here's Germany down here. We like to have some rules and structure in our organizations. What you end up with is 4 quadrants that are 4 different, what we call implicit organizational models of how the people in those cultures tend to grow up, wanting to set up their organizations in certain ways. I'm not going to go into the details here, but basically we have France here in the pyramid, in the quadrant that we call the pyramid of power. France is one of the more high power distance cultures in Europe and a strong uncertainty avoidance culture. And then you have Germany, the US, the UK, India, China, and the mindset is going to be different. That's the takeaway point here. When you do business with these different countries, it's helpful to understand. Pyramid of power, well-oiled machine, village market, extended family, completely different mindsets. We use assessment tools. One of them is the COI, Cultural Orientations Indicator. If I were coming to your organization to do an assessment of each of your cultural preferences, we would look at these 17 different sets of arrows here. And we're looking at these different dimensions. There's fluid and fixed time, being and doing, indirect, direct, instrumental, expressive, informal, formal, particularistic, universalistic. We don't have time to define them all, but basically, we would be able to give you a picture of your cultural preferences in these 17 different dimensions. You could then take that and look at your profile and compare it to, let's say you're going to Germany or you're going to Japan. You could look at the overall cultural profile of that country and see what we call the culture gaps. How am I different than this country that overall that I'm going to? But it's not just countries. We could do this for a team. If these 8, 9 people sitting right here were working on a team, we could have each of you get your profile and you could see, oh, 8 of the 9 people have a preference for more hierarchical management style. I'm the team lead. I have a preference for a more democratic management style. I better think about how to modify my management style. Otherwise, they're all going to think I'm a weak boss. So this tool is incredibly powerful. You can use it in hundreds of different ways. We have another, there we go. We have another assessment tool that we use. I'm probably running out of time. But we look at stages of development of intercultural competence. There are 5, in this assessment tool, we identify 5 different mindsets. How do we relate to cultural differences? It begins on the left with what we call the monocultural mindsets. And it goes to the right to what we call the intercultural or global mindsets. This is how good am I at kind of switching frames of reference from my own to that of the other person who's different in some way from me, and evaluating them from their context. If I'm in these stages over here, chances are I'm not very good at doing that. So this assessment measures our ability to evaluate people from their cultural context. On the left are the monocultural mindset, on the right the intercultural global, a kind of transition stage in the middle. So the first one, denial, that's where people tend to miss differences. They're not really interested in the whole subject of cultural differences. And then you have a stage where, well, I know there are other cultures out there, but mine is superior. And that can happen in more, outrageous ways or very subtle ways. It can just be in a company, we know the right way. We're going to teach them the right way to do it in that other country. And then you have a transition stage where this is where people tend to minimize the differences. Let's just kind of pretend the differences aren't there, tiptoe around them. We're going to look for commonalities between people and similarities, but we're going to kind of miss the differences here. At least we're bridging with people as far as looking for similarities. And then you get to a stage called acceptance, where for the first time we actually begin to really get it that different cultures have different ways of looking at things. And then we get to a stage called adaptation, where not only do we get it intellectually, but we actually have ways that we adapt, ways that we might modify our behavior in order to work more effectively with another culture. So we're coming into the close here, but the IDI is the tool that we use to measure this. And these are one firm that I was working with, one of the big global accounting firms. 6,000 senior managers have taken the IDI. At a certain point in the workshop that we do with them, we put a slide up where we show them the aggregate of their scores. First, we show them where they think they are. They think they're in acceptance. Then we show them where they actually are. They're more in this minimization stage. It's a wake-up call for them. Most people think they're functioning at higher stages than they actually are. The IDI can be used for individual coaching, for preparing people for international assignments. It's used in many different situations, hospitals, schools, by students studying abroad. Here's a quick list of corporations: Boeing, Harley-Davidson, Mattel, General Electric, and so forth. Governmental organizations, the city of Dubuque, Iowa. Minnesota State Supreme Court, State of Oregon. And then we have U.S. Naval Academy, U.S. Air Force, colleges and universities. And then we have nonprofit organizations. Do I see the Rotary Club on there? I don't think so. YMCA, AARP, and United Methodist Church, schools. So that's basically the story. The world's changing. A lot of things are changing. We need to build our intercultural competence, and it's a good thing to do.